Today is a really good day and a really exciting day. Because it marks the 1-year anniversary of my abstination from pornography and masturbation. And it's a tough addiction, and it's not easy. But now that I have made it this entire year, I know it's possible to get away from it. And that has just sparked a lot of passion in me to try and help anybody I can who's going through this same exact thing and give some hope, because I looked at myself for so many years going through this and just thinking, like, man, I'm never going to be able to get out of this. Like, I'm actually trapped in this. And pornography comes with a lot of feelings of shame and guilt, and it guts you from the inside out and can really ruin your life. There's a cop pulling up next to me. I guess he's just checking out stuff. Yep. Second I make an admission, it's to the prisons, which, I mean, honestly is how it feels. That's how it feels to be in that addiction. It feels like, gosh, you're constantly on edge. Like, oh crap, like, is somebody going to find out? Is it going to ruin my relationships? Is it going to make people look at me differently? And there's just a ton of fear that comes around this addiction in particular. Constantly on edge. You don't want anybody like looking at your phone. You don't want anybody looking at anything you're doing online. It's very secretive, which is another issue I think that really exacerbates this addiction, because, you know, I for so many years felt like I was completely alone in it. Like, I was pretty much one of the only ones addicted. And honestly, I didn't really know it was classified as addiction because I was so young, but it just, I mean, that's what it is. And you're kind of trapped and enslaved to it. You don't want to tell anybody, and you're just kind of in the dark with this. And especially like as a Christian, I'm a Christian guy, so pornography is not something that you hear like Christian men talk about and say that they're dealing with. And especially since you're a believer, I mean, you're constantly striving to follow the Lord the best you can. And so I think the enemy really gets you with shame in that regard, because pornography and masturbation feels like such a deep sin, especially when you're younger and you don't even really know what you're doing, but you just feel it and you just know that there's something wrong about it, and you're afraid of anybody figuring anything out. Yeah, I wanted to create this because for years I was in this cycle of pornography and masturbation addiction, and not only did it bring personal feelings of shame and guilt, but it also just brought a lot of aspects in my life down to really mundane, grayed out, like a really grayed out living of life, where everything just kind of feels like, you just kind of feel like a zombie. You feel like you're just walking through life with apathy, no feelings at all, and you feel like you just are stuck and you've got no motivation to do anything, and you know deep down that you want to stop watching it. It's like in the forefront of your mind that you're like, I know this is like my biggest issue, or one of my biggest issues, and I need to stop and I want to stop. But the weird thing about the addiction is you can have that like extremist view of like, I need to, like, desperately need to get out of this, but at the same time you like don't really care. Which is, I think, one of the weirdest things about this addiction is you just know that you need to stop, but you just don't really care, even though you really care. I don't really know how else to explain it. But anyways, being a year in abstination, I have an even greater understanding of how much this addiction takes from you and your life, and how much of a struggle it is, and how much it just hinders the way that you're living, and how you like feel physically, and what you do and put out into the world. It just affects every aspect of your life all the time. And so I just wanted to go over, one, my testimony, just to be relatable to any guy or girl who's going through this. I know it's not just a men's problem, but it predominantly is. And so I kind of come from that man's perspective. This channel is going to be a podcast for other men who want to give their own testimonies, but a couple men have come on already and started talking about their pornography and masturbation addictions, and I just felt like I might as well lead by example and do that same thing. And I don't want to hide anything. Like, I want everything to be out in the open, so that in the details, you guys can kind of look at that and just be like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. I can relate to this little thing. I've never heard somebody talk about this specific thing before. I just want to lay it all out there because I think it'll help the most to be able to just throw it all out there and for guys to be able to relate. So yeah, I'm going to get into it. I'll kind of outline it. Basically what I'm going to do is like give a testimony, like my testimony on it, how I kind of felt through it. And then I'm going to kind of give practical ways, I think, to get out of it. Over this year, I've kind of kept a journal and I've written down a ton of my experience in kind of like a stage format. So I've got like, oh, here's like the first weeks kind of looks like this when you're abstaining, and this is how hard this month is, and like now I'm 3 months in, what's this look like all the way up to a year. So I wanted to do that because I think that's super helpful too and encouraging to guys who are trying to stop, just to kind of see an outline and know what's going on ahead of time and what to prepare for, because that preparation honestly helps out a ton. Knowing what's going to happen in the future, what to expect, when to expect things to hit you, like you're caught off guard. Hopefully that can be eliminated. I think it can. Anyways, I'll get into it. So, I discovered pornography when I was 9 years old. The way I discovered it was there was a book in my home library. It had a book in it about sex education. It wasn't a pornography book or anything. It was just about sex education, and there was men and women in their anatomies. And so when I was flipping through at the age of 9, I'm seeing these pictures, and it's kind of different when you're younger. Like, you just don't really know what's happening. You don't know what you're seeing, why you feel the dopamine hit that you feel. It's not even really that. It's nothing intense, but you're just curious. You're just kind of like, hey, I just kind of feel good while I'm looking at these photos, and I just want more of it. I mean, that's just kind of what you do as a kid. You just like are looking for what makes you feel good. And so pornography being such a big dopamine rush all at once, you see that as a kid and you're like, whoa. And then you kind of are just curious and you're like, what is that? And then you kind of go looking for more. So that's what happened to me. I went looking for more on my iPad that I had just gotten for my birthday. I had been scrolling through YouTube and searching for content and looking for things, and I kind of found what I was looking for, and but I didn't really know what was going on, but I felt like it was wrong. Like, I just felt in my soul that like I was doing something that wasn't right, but I couldn't explain it. I'd never even heard about this kind of thing before. I didn't even know. I hadn't had like the talk or anything like that yet. It didn't really dawn on me that I felt like it was wrong until one day I was in my room scrolling, just looking, and my dad walked in just to check on me and say hey, and you know, I've got my iPad right there and I'm looking at this thing, and then all of a sudden I see my dad and I'm like, oh man, like I just had this rush, like this wave of like guilt and shame and knowing that I was doing something wrong. And then he just left the room because he was just checking in. There's no discovery or anything. And so that was the moment I was like, I gotta hide this. Like, I'm doing something very bad. Yeah, it's just interesting that there's that inherent knowledge that you're just like, you know that this is bad. I mean, there's something to be said about that. So that had gone on for like 2 months. And then that shame and that guilt continued for another month of like, I gotta hide this. I've got to do this in secrecy. But that pleasure, it outweighs how bad you feel, especially in the moment. It just couldn't compete with quitting. Like, I didn't want to stop, and that's when it hooks you, man. Like, you don't want to quit, but you know you should, and you're so young, and so there's not a lot of knowledge that you've got about what's going on. There's no awareness. You don't know what you're getting into is going to just destroy your quality of life for the next decade, or who knows. I know there's guys struggling with it all the way up until there's 40s, 50s, 60s. I mean, it's an awful thing. And so, yeah, when you're young, you just don't really realize. And so, but that wave of guilt and shame had just really gotten its hold on me, and it broke me down. It really tore me apart. There was just one day I was about to get on it, and I was just like, I was breaking down, and I don't really know what caused that other than just intense waves of guilt and shame. And I ran into my bathroom and I locked the door and I fell over the toilet and I just started bawling for like 30 minutes. And I started praying to the Lord. It was desperate, and I was just asking him to deliver me, basically. In kids' terms, like, I remember just repeatedly in my mind just like thinking like, save me, like save me, like please. Yeah, and that was a tough moment, but the Lord definitely met me there, and I know he did, because for the next 5 years I had no issues with pornography at all. There was no feelings of needing to go to that. I felt free. Like I felt like I just didn't want to I didn't want to have anything to do with that anymore. That was a really beautiful thing, and I think that really made my relationship with the Lord take off, because I realized that I couldn't really get away from that by myself, like, because I was already in such a deep cycle of addiction of it. And so I really became more curious about him, and that sparked relationship with him. And there had just been periods of my life where I was having anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and I was going to the Bible a little more and praying too, and that was really being alleviated alleviated as well by going to him through that. And so it was becoming more evident to me that there was something out there greater than myself, and I believed the Lord was it. 5 years later, though, I'm in my room and I'm watching a Netflix show, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a sex scene pops up, and I was not expecting it. I feel like this is a typical way men get addicted. It's just shock. Like, it's not even like, it's an unawareness and you're not expecting it, and it just happens. And so that happened to me, and that's when I discovered masturbation. Again, this was a whole new thing, and I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what I was doing, and I'd never heard about it before, kind of like porn. By age 14, though, I had heard about porn, and I knew what it was, and I knew the term at this point, and I knew it was wrong. I knew people looked at it, at least in the Christian circle, as a wrong thing, and then in more of a secular circle, I know there's people who are aware of, like, maybe this isn't the healthiest habit. I think people were starting to pick up on that. So yeah, I found masturbation, I figured out what that was, and that just sent me into a whole new addiction cycle. Pornography started coming back because of that scene and masturbation. Yeah, so, but I still had this really deep hate for pornography. Like, I knew what it did to me before, and it was the worst to me. I hated it. And I think that really helped with, like, trying to cycle this out. And so pornography ended up being a little bit less of an addiction for me, but it was still definitely present. I think less so than most people, because I think there's a difference between, like, addiction to pornography and addiction to masturbation, and they're very linked, but I think there is a distinction there. My addiction, I think, more so was focused on masturbation. The pornography I could cycle out, and I was like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm not doing it. But I didn't know what masturbation was at the age of 14. Never heard of the term before. Didn't know what I was doing. And so, but I kept doing it because it felt really good, and it alleviated a lot of stress. I used it to be able to fall asleep at night. It just really, it gives you a big wave of relief, and that really helps you instantly conquer anxiety or any stressful feelings that you've been feeling throughout the day. So you know that you have this outlet to completely and immediately alleviate anything you've been struggling with. Or so you think, basically. And why wouldn't you use that? Why wouldn't you want that? Especially if you don't really know what it's going to do to you in the long term. Yeah, why wouldn't you? And so that's what happened to me, and I kept doing it, but I knew that was wrong, and I definitely didn't want anyone finding out about that. So that was also super secretive, and like, I wasn't even telling my closest friends about any of this. Yeah, so years of that went by until I probably hit about 16, 17, and then I started learning more about the term masturbation and what it was. I think I was starting to pick up in the Christian circle, like, that it was looked at as kind of a sin, but I know that's really up for debate, and I want to get into that because I know from my experience how I feel about it and what I think it is for me. And so maybe that'll help you, but I don't think it's the same for everybody. But maybe you can find some relatability in my own experience as well. But I'll get into that in a little bit. Yeah, so I knew that it was wrong, and then about 18 is when I was like, I want to stop, and I couldn't. Like, I definitely couldn't just stop doing it cold turkey. But I really wanted to. Again, I'm just in this cycle. Like, over these years, I've been in more intense cycles of just guilt and shame, and like, I'm gaming all the time, and I'm not motivated to, like, do anything other than game and eat crap. And, you know, I wasn't taking great care of myself, but I didn't have any desire to do that. And it always make me wonder how these other guys are like, how do you have the desire to work out all the time? Is that just a personality trait? Are you just driven like that? Now, I would say, no, I think everybody can reach that. I think everybody naturally can kind of get to that stage of life where they're just kind of like, yeah, I want to take better care of myself. But I think pornography and masturbation really, really hinder that and slow that process down to the point where it eliminates it. Yeah, you really just don't care about taking care of yourself. And I was just in that situation where I was like, man, I want to stop. Like, this is just, I felt like it was dragging my entire life down. Like, I felt like every aspect of my life, like social life, it was in the back of my mind. I felt like in my church, like, it's in the back of my mind when I'm listening to sermons. It's in my mind when I'm sitting with my family at dinner. Like, it's always there. It's constant in the back of your head, and it just drives you nuts, but it gives you so much guilt and shame, and you just like, but you can't tell anybody, and you're sitting there in a circle around the people that you love, and you just feel like you can't connect to them, and it's isolating for sure. It really makes you feel like you're alone. You just deceive yourself into thinking you can fix it yourself. What I really figured out is you need others to help you with this. You really need relationships relationships. And so, yeah, I got to the point where I was 18 and the most I could make it was like a week. I was like, I can make it 3 days. And I was like, yeah, 3 days, I'm done. I'm out of here, bro. And after 3 days, then I would fall back into it and I'd be like, crap. And then I'd make it a week and I'd be like, yep, I'm done. Like, this is it. I finally have broken this habit and this addiction. And then I'd fall back into it the next Saturday, the next Sunday, whatever the next week was. And that scared me because I was like, I have no self-control over this. And I had been watching videos. This is when I started learning more about pornography addiction and watching videos on like how to get out of it. People were giving their testimonies. And I'd started watching some pastors do some videos on it too, and they were preaching, and there was this one guy who did it, and he gave a really great comprehensive guide. Like, it was really practical of like ways you can get out of it, which I want to list a ton of stuff in here too, because I relate to it now that I'm out of it. And so, out of it, yeah, you're never really out of it, but yeah, I'll get out into that in a second too. He gave really good practical advice, but the biggest thing he was like is you got to tell somebody. And that was just, that was terrifying to me. And I'm sure you can relate to that as well if you've been in pornography addiction and masturbation addiction, or if you're experiencing it now, you're like, I can't do that. Like, I can't tell anybody about this, but maybe I can get out of it myself. And so I thought that too. And it was looking like I could. And I got this motivation and I quit for 2 months. There was 2 months where I went without porn and masturbation. I had abstained, and that was incredible. I really thought it was over then. Let me tell you, that first month is really hard, and the second month is actually even harder, but you start to feel the benefits of getting away from it for sure. My motivation, I was like, I'm doing things that I kind of care about now. I'm motivated to do things other than just game. I'm doing like productive things that I like actually enjoy, like playing instruments and that kind of thing. You know, you have more discipline almost, and you feel that because when you're shutting down, the biggest dopamine surge and the biggest reward seeking center in your brain, that creates a ton of discipline. Even only doing it once, like I'm gonna say no, I'm not gonna do it tonight or today, that builds up in your mind because you just conquered that day the biggest vice in your life. Like, you just beat one of the most biologically compelling dopamine surges that you'll ever experience, and that builds up for sure. Like I said, I made it 2 months. I was like, I'm not gonna have to tell anybody, so this is great, and I figured this out on my own. And I'd been like, all this time I'd been praying to the Lord as well, but I felt like prayers just weren't doing it because I was in this cycle of like sin and addiction. I couldn't get out of it. I didn't understand why the Lord wasn't like delivering me and breaking my chains from this addiction. And I came to realize that that had more to do with my own heart and the way I viewed it, and realizing that I actually really didn't want to give it up until I was getting to this point. Yeah, at this point though, I had really been like, yeah, I gotta get out of this, and I was really falling apart with it. And I had made it the 2 months, and so I had a lot of hope because I knew that it was possible to make it more than a week with an addiction like this. And so, like I said, month 2 is really difficult. Yeah, when you're not looking at pornography and you're abstaining from masturbation, it really invades your mind. Like, when you're watching pornography all the time, it's a daily habit or a weekly habit, it invades your mind, and pornography is kind of always at the forefront of what you're doing in your life. Like, it's always in your head. Sexual thoughts are like constantly violating your mind and invading your trains of thought. One night I was laying in bed and a fantasy hit me in my head, which is not uncommon when you're addicted to this stuff, because your brain is doing anything it can to alleviate your stress and get you back into feeling good as often as you can. And so your brain is really on the side of like, let's feel better as fast as we can. And so yeah, fantasies will hit you all the time. And I had a fantasy and I didn't realize the dangers of fantasies. I just had this rolling through my mind, and then out of nowhere I orgasmed without any stimulation like whatsoever, and that was extremely confusing to me, and I just felt cheated because I was just laying there, like I wasn't doing anything. I was just trying to go to sleep, but I had this rolling in my mind. This really goes to show how strong the mind body connection is, because there was no stimulation. I'm just laying on my back just trying to fall asleep, and arms crossed, man, like, and because you're doing everything to hold back. And it just happened. And I never would have thought that could ever happen to somebody. I've never heard that happen before. Like, just a mindgasm. Like, what the heck is that? I felt super cheated, and I felt angry, and overall felt that shame and guilt come back. And that really hurt. But I was like, I'm not going to give back into this. I'm not going to let the floodgates open. But I did. The cycle began all over again, and I was back into this thing for like 2 more months. The whole 2 months, my mind was like, you got to tell somebody. Like, this is the last thing that you haven't tried. And I really believed it was going to set me free. Like, that was the way. And so I was praying to the Lord, like, give me strength to be able to get out of this and to tell somebody. And I knew the day that I was supposed to tell somebody because I could feel the confidence. And even though it was extremely, like, I was shaking, I wanted to tell my dad, but my dad ended up being out of town for some work related stuff. And my mom was the only one around, and that was going to make it so much more difficult for obvious reasons. But my mom has been such a person of trust in my life, and I get not everybody has that, but try to find somebody like that. It's really important to have somebody in your life that's like that. And my mom was just a huge pinnacle of like trust and empathy. And so I knew that if I had to tell her, like, it was going to be hard, but it wasn't going to be the end of the world, and I needed to be out of this. That was how badly I needed to be to get out of this addiction. We got in the car one day after church, and I knew I was going to tell her, and I'm just shaking, and I just say it. I just lay it all out there. And she welcomed me with open arms, and she really made me feel a lot. She gave me a lot of peace about it and let me know I wasn't alone, because I thought I was alone. She let me know that basically this is the majority, and I really thought that I was one of the only guys out here having this struggle. Once that happened, I was like, I'm free. I'm done with this. I was like, it's over, because I did the last thing. I did the hardest part, and now the magic's gonna happen, I guess, and it's just done. And yeah, that didn't end up being the case again. But I told my dad, and I needed him as accountability, so he became my accountability partner. Then for like another month there, I was still in the cycle, but I'm in so much guilt and shame, and I'm like, what's going on, man? Like, I thought once I'd taken all the steps, like I was done with this, but I really hadn't realized like all of the ways that I could get out of this, and I didn't realize like what it actually looked like, and I didn't have a lot of like mercy on myself either. Like, I was really hard on myself about this too, but I didn't understand the process of it, which is what I want to explain in a second, because I think the process isn't intuitive, but I think it can be. There can be a lot more knowledge and understanding on this topic, so that it's just as easy as possible to be able to get away from it. But yeah, I laid it all out there, and then my dad was my accountability partner, and then he found out through the router or something that I had been watching pornography. So yeah, he discovered it, and then he came and talked to me about it. And there's something that happens when you realize somebody that you love really does know and has actually caught you in the act of watching pornography. That clicked in my head even more than the other times where I was like, I gotta quit. Like, something clicked in my head, and I was like, I'm done. That night, I was like talking to the Lord, and I was just saying out loud to him and myself, I was like, I'm done. I was saying it out loud verbally, and I said it like 7 times. I was like, I am done. I'm never doing this again. I'm quitting this now. And I think there's also something psychological to that component as well, of like telling yourself and then trying to prove it to yourself that you're done. So that started my year of abstination, which led up to today. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to tell you I'm free from pornography and masturbation. I haven't looked at it in a year. I haven't masturbated in a year, which I get sounds insane, but I'll explain that too in the health stuff behind that. But I'm not going to tell you that I'm free from it, because it's still a struggle that I'm battling with every single day. Fantasies or previous pictures from pornography or videos can hit me in the head and invade my mind, and I have to actively defeat them all the time, like actively fight them. Yeah, it's still a daily battle, but it gets way easier the farther in you get. And so yeah, I wanted to dive into the journal and what my updates kind of looked like in the timeline, just to kind of help out if you want to try and get away from this. I wrote in detail what was going on and how I felt. So I'm gonna dive into that. The first 2 months are the most intense. Okay, so you go into it for 2 months. You're in the thick of it, and you reach that 3rd month, and you're starting to feel kind of free. You're like, I feel really like I have more control and self-control on myself. Like, I have the reins of this now, and I have way more of a handle on my choices and my urges. Yeah, the first 4 weeks, you're going to feel like you're just white knuckling life. Yeah, it's kind of difficult, but it's not impossible for sure. It's definitely possible. I'm going to get into like what those months looked like, how to like the best ways to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to get away from this. But I'm going to go through kind of like the timeline first of how I was feeling. Third month felt like I had broke a barrier because I had never made it over 60 days before. The urges definitely still come over you sometimes, but they're not as bad in the third month, and you definitely feel like you have more control. They're definitely way more manageable. Yeah, the wet dream side of things, if you've heard of that term before, kind of where you ejaculate overnight, that is super consistent because your brain is healing. It's a good thing. So if it's happening to you overnight, do not feel like you're like, oh man, I got to start over or anything like that. Like, that's just natural. That's just how your body is taking care of you. And people get into like, what are the health implications of quitting like masturbation, abstaining? I'm not saying everybody needs to. I still think there's something, it's different for everybody on the side of masturbation. I'm just going to be giving you my experience. And for me, that was quitting masturbation altogether. Your body takes care of you. I've done a lot of research on the prostate cancer stuff because I've been worried about that. There's been no solid evidence that I've seen so far that has outweighed the evidence of like, this is super beneficial for you in your life. Prostate cancer is not something I'm worried about. I would look into that yourself to be sure, but I'm just saying from my perspective, I'm not worried about it. And like I said, I've done a ton of research into that because that was something I was definitely thinking about a lot. I was like, is this bad for me? Like, am I going to be infertile for the rest of my life if I do this? Is that the cost? No, I really don't think it is. I don't think it is. Like I said, I'm going to go through this with the tools to stop. Accountability is huge. Telling somebody is easily the most effective. It really does do something in your mind. Really try to tell somebody if you can. If you've got somebody you can trust, I promise you, it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. People are a lot more understanding than you expect them to be. And I think that just comes with years of fortifying in your mind that people are going to just reject you. And make sure you're going to people that you can really trust and that care about you and your feelings, or go to a counselor, a therapist. I know some people do that and they go tell them, and that helps a lot. I didn't do that. I just told people in my circle, and that really helped. And there's data and understanding is the section I wrote. Knowledge of what pornography and masturbation does to you biologically is a huge motivator. I did a ton of research, watched a lot of informational YouTube videos. There's this woman named Dr. Trish Lee. She's a neuroscientist. She specifically works with porn addiction and dopamine receptors and how that works. And she's incredible. She's on YouTube, so totally go check her out because I was watching her stuff all the time. Just knowing the benefits, like the health benefits from getting out of it, or like she goes over problems you maybe have, like erectile dysfunction is a huge thing for people who are really addicted to pornography. She really covers that stuff. Like, all of that is super helpful. So yeah, look for the data. I wrote out a list for motivation of what I was stopping for, because you want to know the why behind why you're stopping, and you need to know who you're stopping for. Those are so important to know, so you can kind of go over this list or think about it when you have those urges, because a big part of this is like, you forget. When the urges take over your mind, you're dominantly thinking about the pleasure that you could get from this. And so everything that you've told yourself before, it just takes a back seat. I mean, it's screaming, but you're not paying attention to it. You don't care because you just, And so reading what you are doing this for, why you're doing this, who you're doing it for, while you're in the midst of that is a killer. Like, it just, oh man, that helps so much. Like, so I wrote things like, when I made it 2 to 3 months, I felt so much more motivated. I knew that. I felt confident and happy. I was implementing self-care so much better. I was like working out and exercising and even reading books, which is insane. Like, when you've got this addiction, books are like the last thing that you're going to, because your attention span is so quick, because pornography is so quick and you get that dopamine spike quick. So YouTube shorts and like Instagram reels are like the only thing that are satisfying that. So you can't take in information or content for more than 30 seconds before your brain is like, I've got to move on to the next best thing all the time. Your brain's like that all the time. That's what I'm going to take clips of this and make them like 30-second shorts, minute shorts of like the best like gold nugget parts that I'm talking about that can really help, because I think that's going to help a lot of dudes. It's hard to sit down for like an hour of like 45 minutes or however. I'm going to try to really cut this down, but for that long and focus on something. Self-care has been so much better, a lot less self-conscious. Relationships are richer. Saying no, it builds up that discipline. Like I was saying earlier, it really does. Naturally, you think you're not a disciplined person, you just start doing it once, and then you do it once again the next week, and you do it once again the next month, and then you do it once again the next day, and then the next week, and next day, and day, and day. And next thing you know, it's weeks, months. That's what happened to me. I was learning to say no in my head, and it just built up. I don't feel as sad and shameful and like lonely all the time. Sexual thoughts are rarely on my mind anymore. I feel like I can be closer to the Lord. That's another thing, is the enemy really makes you feel like you're distanced from the Lord because you're like praying, but you keep going back to the sin, and you're like, am I just like, does God like, how is he looking at this? Like, I'm sitting here sinning and like being like, please Lord, help me out of this, and then just like going to jerk off later. It just really takes a toll on your relationship with him, because nothing that he's doing that is like making you think that like he doesn't care, but like the enemy is really making you feel like it's just hypocritical to be going to the Lord to talk to him about this when you just keep going back into it. He is always there and listening. And I felt like, why am I praying and nothing's happening? It was a heart issue for me, is what I found out later down the road. He really cared that I did get out of this. He really cares that you get out of this. It really comes down to free will, because he gives you the choice, and you've got to make the decision. And you can. It's possible, and you can build that up. It's a build-up process. It's not like I'm going to quit cold turkey. It's like a build-up. And I'm not going to say it's super easy, but because of the benefits that you're getting continuously throughout it, that makes it worthwhile and easier to go through it. So it's not like the urges and stuff are easy to conquer, but because you're starting to feel better, that really just steps in and is like, it helps you out a ton. So, thinking about future relationships and wife and kids, and that helps a lot. If you've got kids of your own or children, like one of the guests from a previous episode that we did on this channel was Ben, and he was like, alcoholics talk about how they don't deserve an alcoholic dad, and he was like, yeah, that changed my mindset. Like, my kids don't deserve to have a porn addicted dad. And I thought that was really impactful. And so, yeah, just thinking about wife and kids and my future spouse is a big thing. That helps. Also, make a list of how you feel when you are on it, so you remember, because once you're starting to get away slowly, you kind of forget how bad you felt before too. So write out a list of how awful it was. It's weird how your brain just forgets like that, but it does. You just forget the experience, and that I think is a big problem and reason why we keep ending up in the cycle too, is the forgetting side of things. Sad and ashamed, less motivated, don't want to go to work, worried constantly about relapsing. All of those things were things that I wrote in my list of like, this is why I hated this, like this is why I can't stand it. Hobbies are huge. Getting into your hobbies that you love is like a massive thing. Figuring out what you used to like, if you didn't, figuring out what you do like, because with this addiction, I tried to quit cold turkey multiple times and I didn't know why it was working, and I learned it's because you have to replace it. You've got to replace the addiction. It can't just go away cold turkey. And the best way to replace that is with, well, okay, so from a Christian standpoint, I personally believe it's the Lord. It definitely makes it easier having a relationship with the Lord, but if you're a secular guy, the best way to replace that is just getting into your hobbies, figuring out what you like to do. Like if you're a musical guy, you kind of know you like music, like get a ukulele. If you really like skateboarding, do a ton of that. Keep yourself busy and replace it, because your dopamine receptors need something else to satisfy, because it's too intense for you to handle on your own, and your brain is going to be stronger than you are in the sense of urges, because you're so new into figuring out the discipline of this, but your brain is so wired and so experienced in telling you to just masturbate and just watch porn and just feel better. And so with your lack of experience and your brain's prior knowledge, it's hard to compete with that. But if you're satisfying your brain and your dopamine receptors and giving it at least a little something to enjoy, then that helps a ton, because you're lowering the threshold for how intense the urges are going to be. If you get dopamine, which is just enjoyment and pleasure, if you get that from playing the ukulele, which is hard, you feel really unmotivated and numb for the beginning when you're trying to build up, because your dopamine receptors are at such a high level and ukulele's just not doing it. That's why you can't get into things that you want to do. Your dopamine receptors are so high and you just can't find pleasure in the little things like you normally would be able to. And that's why you can't tap into this. Why can't I consistently learn how to play an instrument? Why can't I consistently play basketball and get better at football and, all of that? And so that's what's going on there. That's why. But if you're replacing that and you're starting to learn instruments, you're starting to do things that that you love, you start to get dopamine hits from that. And as your threshold is lowering, you're hitting harder hits from the enjoyment and pleasure from learning something new or doing something that you love. And that balances it out and that replaces it. It's hard at the beginning because you're just like slowly getting into it, but try your darndest to like pick up a thing that you love once a week or something like that. It doesn't even have to be daily or hourly or anything, but because you got to implement that slowly at first. It takes some time and you'll learn that, and you just got to kind of have grace for yourself in that, just to be like, yeah, this is going to take a little bit, but you don't have to fall apart if, you're not able to enjoy things because you've been like that for so long. You get it. You understand. And when I was in the 3 months, I was like, I'm still battling this every day, but I just haven't given in. And that was because of the Lord and these things that I was learning. And so I made it to 6 months and started writing down an update. So from a Christian standpoint, I'll kind of dive into this too, because it's really helpful. Understanding scripture, like kind of what scripture's talking about. There's tons of scripture that you can go through. There's Christians that are like, I don't see the Lord talking about masturbation or pornography in here. It does. It's just in like older, more discreet terms, basically, because they say like sexual immorality, and that covers a lot of stuff, and that definitely ropes in masturbation with it for certain people. I'm just going to dive into that. I think on the topic of like, is masturbation a sin? For me, in my experience, I believe it is for me. I'm not saying it is for you because, and I know that's not super helpful, but I'll kind of explain that more. I used masturbation as a crutch for when life was getting tough and stressful and I couldn't handle it. And I was turning to it instead of the Lord. And the Lord wants you to turn to him because he can fulfill that feeling of like loneliness and stress and sadness and all of that. He can fulfill it, but I wasn't turning to him. And it's hard to understand how to feel that and how he can do that for you, but he does, especially through this. And so I was turning to masturbation as a form of pleasure and immediate gratification instead of the Lord, and that was the sin for me. There's like that passage where it says, Paul is like talking about if you're looking at a woman lustfully, like you've already committed that sin in your heart. The fantasies, I contribute to that. When I'm thinking of a woman in that way, that's definitely not the way the Lord intended it. That for me was also sin. But I understand that there's some people that can masturbate and not look at porn and not think about it. I have a hard time understanding that because I'm just not wired that way. But some people, I guess, are, and they can masturbate and not think about it. And it's just a way of like relief. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's just, I hear it's different for some people. So if you can do it without sinning, like, there you go, man. I just wanted to cut out that pathway back into addiction because I knew it was something that contributed to it. So if I was masturbating, I knew it would lead back into pornography for me because it was so interconnected. And so that's why I believe it's a sin for me. If you relate to that, maybe if you're Christian, just like pray about it and think more about it to kind of understand it. I think a lot of issues in life are just come down to your own heart, and that's how the Lord looks at it. I don't think it's black and white for a lot of things, but the Lord is definitely like black and white in certain aspects of the Bible. He's clear about a lot of things, but there's a lot of things in this world that are just kind of gray areas, and he meets you there and he understands that. And so it comes down to your heart. So if you're diving in the word and you are building a relationship with him, he has grace for you in that, and he understands your heart and he understands you. That's your own journey and you'll figure it out. That's what my journey kind of looks like. So more scriptures that kind of help is Paul talks about taking your thoughts captive. That's a big one. So like the fantasy thing, I mindgasmed. I don't even know if there's a term for that. I didn't realize how dangerous that was to be entertaining those thoughts, those fantasies. I would totally suggest when you're quitting porn, do your best to quit that as well. Like quit the fantasies that's going on in your mind, because those can really stoke the flame and get you into this cycle again for sure. So, and that's not easy at first, but you'll slowly start. What it kind of looks for me is like I say no in my head, like it comes on and I just cut it off. It's hard, like especially at first, but then you get into a habit of it and it's easy now. Like I can just say no and the thought just cuts off. It goes away. That's huge. Build that up slowly too. Work on being like, if I'm having a fantasy, because they pop up a lot when you're in that first 2 to 3 months because your brain's trying to compensate for you not masturbating or looking at pornography. Just be like, no. The replacing thing, the Lord does talk about that in the Bible. That's how I kind of interpret this passage, but there's a passage where Jesus is actually talking and giving a sermon, or it's like a parable, and he's talking about how a demon is in a dude, and then the guy purges the demon, and then the demon leaves him, and then the demon like circles around. This is all an analogic. Is that a word? This is an analogy, parable. And the demon circles back and he sees the house is kept, which means cleaned up and empty. And so where he previously resided, this demon previously resided, which is in this guy. And what it means by like kept, like cleaned up, is like I quit masturbation and pornography for a week. I got things together. So things are cleaned up, and then the demon comes back in, and it says it brings in 7 more demons or something like that to fill more space. There was moments where I would abstain, but then I would go into a binge session after that because I wasn't used to it, and I didn't replace it with anything because my brain was still wired to be like, you need these surges of dopamine. And so yeah, that happened. So that's what kind of how I interpret that parable is, you've got to replace the addiction with something else so that the demon doesn't have a place in you. And the demon is just referring to any vice or anything that you're struggling with that you want purged out of you. So that's kind of how I interpret that. So yeah, there's plenty of verses. Check those out. I'm sorry I don't have I wrote down 1 Corinthians 6:18, Genesis 39:12, 2 Corinthians 10:5, but I don't really know exactly. I don't know why, but I didn't write down the verses with I don't know. This is the biggest one I think that the Bible gives us, is fleeing. All of this I'm giving is also super practical. Like, I'm giving it from a Christian perspective, but if you implement these practically, it definitely works for you. So it talks about like fleeing. Like, there's the story in the Bible where Joseph is in the midst of Potiphar's wife, which is like the guy who like owns him because he's kind of a slave, and his wife like tries to seduce him, and he runs. Joseph runs for it. And then Paul talks about that later in Corinthians somewhere about you've got to flee sexual immorality. The term flee is so important. I don't know how to stress that anymore. The term flee is so important. You can't sit there and battle this on your own. It's so intense, and you know it's so intense. Like, it's hard to fight. You can't, is the thing. You're not strong enough to fight this by yourself. And sitting there praying to the Lord like, oh man, Lord, please, like, deliver me from this moment of urges. You gotta run. The Lord tells you in the Bible, like, you just gotta get out of there. It's literally what it's looked like for me sometimes is getting out of my bed and sprinting down the hall, down the stairs, outside. Not even kidding. I found myself on my front porch in 10-degree weather, freezing, but it's way better than giving in to what the enemy was trying to tempt me with. So run for it. Leave the area that you're in and go somewhere else. And that helps a ton. Leave your phone behind. Leave anything that's tempting you behind. Don't take it with you. The best thing is to go towards another person. You're not going to have these sexual thoughts when you're near somebody. Anyways, there's that. Flee. Prayer. The prayer does work. Just keep praying. I know the prayer sounds kind of like when you're praying to the Lord and you've been dealing with this for years, like you're like, is this doing anything? Like, is he listening to me at all? He definitely is. You need prayer in combination with the other things that you're doing. Definitely pray. If you don't know what to pray for things like, Lord, help me remember to run for it, to like flee. Help me to remember why I'm trying to do this, like why I'm trying to get healthier. Reading the Bible daily helps a ton. As a Christian too, I read the Bible daily, and that really helped me get out of it, because when you're constantly reading the Bible and you're like, I just masturbated and now I'm going to go read the Bible, or I just read the Bible, am I really about to go watch porn? It really affects that. So try to keep Bible consistent and don't look at the Bible and be like, oh, because I masturbated or watched porn today, like I am not worthy to read the Bible, like it's not going to do anything for me. Just keep it up and reading, and just flip to random passages or do a Bible in the year thing. It helps as a Christian. Yeah, so I went over the 6 months, and oh yeah, my discipline at 6 months had skyrocketed. The urges got a little more intense and frequent during the 6 month mark, but I also allowed myself to consume sugar, which I believe is the culprit. I forgot about diet. Diet's huge. The sugar thing is so weird. I don't think this is going to be the case for everyone, but sugar for me really got me. Sugar would really enhance the urges for some reason. I don't know how I figured out sugar was the correlation. I would eat sugar and then the urges would be more intense. I knew that. So I cut it out, which is not easy, and I don't recommend to everybody, but I would recommend it if you're trying to do everything that you can to stop, because sugar also is kind of like a drug in the way that it hits your dopamine receptors, and I think there's a link there between my dopamine receptors responding to sugar and thinking, oh man, that was a really close hit. You were almost there. Let's watch porn or masturbate to finish the job. So yeah, so sugar, I cut that out, and that helped a lot. I don't know if that's going to be a thing for everybody, but it definitely was for me. So yeah, just kind of trying to eat wholer, I guess. Eat healthy, that helps. I'm just giving a bunch of tips basically on how to make this as easy as possible. And on the side of that, in the 6 month mark, I was learning like social media. I've never done social media, but I watch YouTube and stuff. I have a problem with social media in the fact that I think they are out to get you in terms of pornography. I think they make a lot of money from quickly exposing you to a graphic photo, like soft porn type of photo, real quick while you're scrolling in your feed. And that really causes a chain reaction. And I think that gets a lot of younger people people too. Like when they're like, I want to have a social media account. And then all of a sudden, Instagram's bombarding you with women in bikinis and all this crap. And you're like, what the heck is going on? And you find yourself 10 years down the road in this addiction that you never planned to be in, and your life feels miserable all the time. So cut social media if you can. I cut YouTube out for the first 3 months, I think. I re-downloaded it because I was getting more control over myself. But YouTube also doesn't really try and ping you with these dopaminergic photos like Instagram and Twitter do. And so I'm really trying to stay away from Instagram and Twitter and all that the best that I can. So there's that. I made it to 6 months, and then I made it to, I should have wrote 9 months, but I wrote at 8 months, which is kind of the same thing, honestly. At 8 months, this is how I wrote it down, is like how I was feeling at this point. I was getting better at ukulele. I'd never done that before. Like I never like consistently sat down and learned an instrument, and I was doing that. Like that was happening. And that's just a slow benefit that starts to happen to you. You'll notice like you have the motivation and actual excitement and joy to do this. I attempted to make my first lo-fi album. I'm still in the middle of that. So that's happened so far, which is so cool. Like I've learned a ton of skills and been motivated to do that. I've set this channel up. The Lord has set this channel up really, but I had at least the motivation to get up and do it. And he really worked that through me. Now there's a podcast that's in the works and that I'm get a lot of fulfillment from and I'm really excited about. That's been a big thing. I work out consistently, and what consistently looks like for me, I've noticed like if you're trying to work out, like you want to work out as much as you will allow yourself to work out. So if you kind of hate it, find the aspects of it that you love and just do that. Don't make it like a stressful thing. Like working out should be like therapeutic, honestly, for you. And working out helps a ton in terms of this. If you like running, like figure out how you like to run. I like to run just 1 mile. That's perfect. If you like to weight lift, like pick up a 10-pound weight. Start doing like push-ups, like do 10 push-ups a day or 50, or it doesn't have to be a whole routine. It doesn't have to be intense. And that builds up as well. Next thing you know, you're working out a couple times a week for full 30 to 45 hour sessions. See, for me, like I love working out, but I only really love working out for the first 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, I get pretty much done. It's actually changing. I'm getting more to the 45-minute mark. I think that's just what's going on with the journey of getting more discipline. But like at first, I was only working out for 10 to 20 minutes, doing high intensity, quick stuff, and it just started sort of evolve. So like 2 times a week, I'll do like workouts that are like 30, 45 minutes. And I like body weight stuff. So just push-ups and pull-ups are like the main thing that I like to do. And that's just what I found works for me. And so make it work for you in the way that you'll actually get up and do it. If you're like, oh man, I feel awful, but I could do 5 push-ups right now, just do it. And that builds up for sure. And next thing you know, by next month, you're doing 20 to 30 push-ups. So it builds. I read a load more, which is kind of funny to me because I never liked reading, but now I just have this cool craving for knowing more. I think that just comes with being a youth as well. When you're getting more motivation, as you just want to, you realize how kind of stupid you are, and you want to know more and be more competent, especially when you're like shaking the addiction, and you're getting more motivation. You're like, man, since I have this motivation, I want to better myself in the healthiest ways possible. So reading's been good for that. I've been enjoying that. Sexual thoughts rarely invade my mind now, and by rarely I mean maybe once a day. It probably was like 2 times a day at this point. Now at the year mark, some days I actually go without really thinking about sexual thoughts. I'm just being totally honest with you. I'm not trying to like sugarcoat anything. There's definitely days where it's still popping up. So urges still come and you still fight them. They're not as hard as they were at all anymore now that I'm at a year in. You'll feel the same way when you're at 3 months. You're like, I'm like feeling pretty disciplined and good about this. Once you're getting to that year mark, you're feeling like loads better. And you're like, I didn't know I could even get to this point where it's like the sexual thoughts aren't always on my mind like this. So that's good. Yeah, I have a deep desire for learning and growth now, which is really cool. And self-control and discipline is stronger than ever, which just does loads for your life. It just changes every aspect of what you're going into. And you find a lot more joy and fulfillment in the things that you're doing as well. So I haven't written down anything for the year mark. I'm feeling like pretty great now. I'm feeling a lot better. I know that there's this hope because I was looking at myself for years and being like, I'm never going to be able to get out of this. And now that I've seen that I can, because the Lord has really worked that through me, and there's been a lot of research that I've done and stuff. Now that I know that it's possible for me, I know that it's possible for every guy. I know it is. It's just hard, and there's not a lot of outline for it. Like people don't really talk about like an outline for it. If you're watching this and you're going through this and you're feeling that like loneliness and that emptiness and you're just numb to to life and you have no motivation, you haven't accomplished really anything, you haven't created anything, dude, I feel you in that. Like, I totally empathize with you. That was me too. Like, the moments where I was breaking down crying at 9 years old, and I understand that disparity that you're in, that you feel on the daily, and it just impacts everything that you're doing in your life. So I get it. Like, I totally get it. And I'm sorry that's going on and that's happening to you, because it's happened to me, and I hate that it's happening to men out there. And I think there's a big majority of men who are going through this, and it's just so sad to know that's going on. So I just have this big passion to do whatever I can to help. And if you find yourself getting out of it too, like, you will as well, because once you start to get out of it, you just you have this craving to help other people get out of that just rock bottom that you were at for so many years. I really hope that this helps out. Like I said, I've been at this for a year, but it's still a battle every day. But it definitely gets easier. You can definitely get out of it. It just takes some time. Like, if you try to implement stuff that I'm talking about, and you're trying to do your own research and learn and stuff, but you fall back into it, like, say you relapse, don't freak out or have hard feelings on yourself. That's part of the healing process. As your brain's rewiring, try your darndest not to give in and let the floodgates open up again. But if that does happen, that's okay. You build this up in your brain, and it starts to really get some traction. Then all of a sudden you're just rolling with it. But you can definitely do it. And I know the first 3 days it's overwhelming, and you're having anxiety and depression, and you're stressed out, but just pull through for a day, and then do it for a day again, or do it for 3 days the next time. Be like, I'm going to do this for 3 days now, and then try to go for a week. And that builds up. Your brain literally reforms its pathways, and it builds up the discipline, and you start to get out of it. I swear, you will start to get things together, and you'll start feeling so much better. You start feeling so much more fulfillment. You just feel like you can get crap done and work hard and build a life for yourself. And if you're Christian, you can really build a life with the Lord and a relationship with Him, which is a beautiful thing. And so I know there's hope in this, and I hope this just has a little impact on even one guy, just to see this and be like, okay, so I'm not struggling, I'm not alone. The reason I'm making this is because I'm hoping men can stop feeling alone in it and actually have some practical ways to get out of it. Because I feel like, especially with Christians will be like, you just got to call on the Lord, this is your own sin and it's in your own heart. And it's okay, yeah, but also there's practical ways to get out of it, and you make the choice in your heart with the Lord. And it's not all that black and white. If you have a relationship with Him, you just talk with Him about it all the time, and you try to implement these practical steps. It's not some spiritual, I don't know, there's actual practicality in getting away from this. It's not because I believed for a while, it was I pray and then I'm done with this, or like I said, I tell somebody and then I'm done with this. It's just a buildup, and you build relationship with the Lord too when you're going through it, a ton, and it's super beneficial and it's super fulfilling, and your life just has so much more meaning. You have feelings, you actually feel things again, or if you felt like you never felt things, you start to remember what feeling things were like. It's just great. It's a great thing. Your life really just starts to kind of pick up. And so yeah, I know there's hope. And so if you're one of those guys out there that's I see pornography and masturbation having a negative impact on my life, and I want to see if I can rid it and see if that makes a change, I highly suggest going for it. Please try it out. And I'm gonna put my email or some form of contact in the description so that anybody can reach out to me to talk about it too, because I'm open to that. I'm open to helping in any way that I can. And I'm not saying I have it all together at all. It's on my mind all the time that I could end up watching pornography in the next 10 minutes or masturbating in the next 10 minutes. That's a real thought that I have a lot. So I'm always on guard with that, but that's not a stressful thing. It definitely doesn't impact my life negatively compared to what porn and masturbation was doing. Holy crap. Yeah, man. So yeah, you build up that discipline, and your life just really starts to heal. So it's a good thing. Getting away from this addiction is a very good thing. Yeah, it really will bring you a lot more joy and fulfillment and purpose and meaning to your life, because not that pornography and masturbation, getting rid of that gives you purpose, but the benefits that you reap because you've done that enhances your purpose and fulfillment and meaning altogether, for sure. Yeah, like I said, if you're going through it, it. Like, man, I feel for you. I know what you're going through. If you want, reach out to me. That's cool. Yeah, I'm just hoping that this podcast that's being put together will really help address these things. The podcast isn't just for porn and masturbation, but I think it's going to be a huge aspect of it. Like, the majority of the guests have talked about it. There's a ton of men out there, like all the guests have had this mindset of like, we've all want to do the best we can to help to get others out of it from our own experiences. And maybe our collective experiences will be enough to be able to alleviate and educate and heal and give hope to other guys. So yeah, man, I really hope this helped out.